Tradition versus transformation, the storm around Liberia's harmful cultural practices. Bill. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we analyze Africa's biggest headlines with depth, courage, and truth. I'm your lead host, Ami Callan. Today, we're diving into the controversy that's forcing Africa to ask, can we honor our heritage while protecting our people? Across Africa, the battle between tradition and transformation is heating up, and this time, Liberia is at the center of the storm. President Joseph Nyuma Boakai's call to ban harmful cultural practices has sparked outrage in parliament, dividing lawmakers and shaking the very foundation of Liberian identity. Is this reform or rebellion against culture? The political winds in Liberia have picked up into a full-blown gust of cultural, legal, and human rights debate. The recently introduced bill titled An Act to Ban Harmful Cultural Practices in Liberia, championed by Joseph Nyuma Boakai, has triggered both cheers and jeers in the halls of the legislature. The drama, the stakes, and the deeper questions about identity, rights, and modernization make this more than just another parliamentary squabble. Let's unpack the debate, compare across Africa, bring a bit of lightness, because sometimes serious issues benefit from a little levity, and look ahead to where this might lead. The bill and the flashpoint. President Boakai's message to the legislature makes his stance clear. The time has come to legislate against practices that undermine the dignity, rights, and health of Liberians, especially women and children. He points to treaty obligations, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Maputo Protocol. The proposed legislation would ban female circumcision, commonly female genital mutilation, or FGM, child marriage, and other harmful cultural practices. It builds in a 6-month transitional phase for education, community dialogue, and engagement with traditional leaders. Yet the response is sharply divided. On one side, supporters argue that tradition cannot be a license for harm. On the other, critics say the bill is an insult to cultural heritage and frames our culture as something to be eradicated. Voices from the House, Culture Clash Edition. On one side of the chamber, you have representatives like Gizzy Collins, Lofa County, who thunder that our culture is not harmful and that tradition gives identity and cohesion. He objected that if we are going to ban, why not ban other things like tattoos or sexual minorities? Yes, he said that, rather than pick on our culture. And James Kalla, Bong County, asked, what's harmful in our culture? Invoking rural traditions, initiation schools, and sense of belonging. On the flip side, advocates such as Moima Briggs Mensah stand firm. Culture must not trump human rights or safety. Some of these practices cause lifelong trauma, she stressed. Al Jazeera. Let's inject a little humor for a moment. It's as if the House of Representatives is staging a reality TV show called Cultural Traditions, Survivor Edition, where some players say, vote me off the island of human dignity, and others say, but it's been done for generations, don't rock the canoe. Meanwhile, the rights advocates are outside yelling, throw the idol back in the bush and join us. But behind the jokes lies a serious tension. How to respect heritage without sanctioning harm. Africa-wide comparison. How do others do it? Liberia is far from the only African state grappling with the cultural versus rights dilemma. A few comparisons. In Senegal, FGM has been outlawed since 1999, and the country has seen prosecutions, public campaigns, and community-based work. However, enforcement remains uneven and clandestine practices persist. In Mali, pre-coup under civilian rule, or Burkina Faso, child marriage has also been banned, yet high prevalence remains especially in rural areas, illustrating the gap between law and lived reality. In neighboring Sierra Leone, The same secret society system that operates in Liberia, the Sandy Society, continues a complex role: cultural custodian, initiator of girls, network of influence. Thus, Liberia's proposed bill follows a continental pattern: state instruments stepping in to regulate long-standing cultural practices in the name of free rights. But the real question is implementation. Many African countries have laws on paper but weak enforcement, minimal resources, and persistent local resistance. In comparing Liberia to other countries, one forward-looking note emerges. Successful reforms tend to combine legal bans and strong community buy-in. Legislation alone doesn't dismantle secret societies or shift social norms overnight. Why this moment matters beyond the bill. Symbolism of modernization. For Liberia, passing such a law would signal a step toward aligning with global human rights frameworks, boosting its international reputation. It could also impact foreign aid, partnerships, and global standing. Identity and political risk. The backlash among lawmakers reveals how deeply culture is tied to political identity. For rural constituencies, initiation rites and traditional ceremonies are not just practices, but identity anchors. Alienating them can open political fault lines. Women and children at the center. The data tell a somber story. According to human rights documentation, Liberia has not yet criminalized FGM fully, and the practice continues in the Sandy Society context. The advocates for human rights. The activists argue that this bill is a rare chance to change that. Human rights versus tradition. Not a zero-sum game. The rhetoric often frames culture versus rights as adversarial, but it doesn't need to be. The more forward-looking lens. How can culture evolve while respecting safety and dignity? The humor buffer. Yes, I promised. If culture and human rights were at a dinner table in the Liberian legislature, culture might be pouring palm wine and saying, "Sit down, new laws, you're disturbing my harmony." Meanwhile, human rights might be wearing a superhero cape and saying, "Harmful traditions, I'm here to save the day." And lawmakers. Well, some might be sneaking extra plates of jollof rice, hoping the argument ends before dessert. In seriousness, the humor doesn't diminish the stakes. It underscores how absurd it is when practices that cause harm are defended on the basis of tradition, as though tradition is a sacred cow immune from critique. What to watch for next 3 months and beyond. 1. Committee review. The House has referred the bill to the Committees on Gender, Health, Internal Affairs, and Judiciary for detailed review. They have a 3-week time frame for recommendations. Will they amend the bill? Will they add penalties? Will they push back the effective date? 2. Engagement with traditional leaders. The text proposes education campaigns and dialogues with traditional authorities. Success here will be key to implementation. If chiefs and Sandy Society elders buy in, or at least don't sabotage, the transition, the law will have more teeth. 3. Implementation mechanics. Enforcement of bans on practices like FGM often falter because of secrecy, stigma, weak policing, and lack of resources. The government must prepare clinics, legal aid, protection services, and community outreach. As older human rights reports underline, FGM remains uncriminalized in Liberia, and secret society mechanisms complicate enforcement. 4. Backlash and politics. We might see Uganda-style large-scale campaigns, or we might see rural revolts, or legislative gridlock. The risk, if communities perceive the law as an external imposition, Western framing as challengers put it, there could be backlash. 5. Comparison and ripple effect. If Liberia passes the law, other West African states with similar traditions, like Sierra Leone, Guinea, may feel increased pressure. Conversely, if the bill fails, it sends a message to rights advocates across the region that culture can still trump reform. A forward-looking lens. Looking ahead, I'd suggest Liberia and similar countries consider the following strategic directions. Cultural reform, not eradication. A smarter pathway is to transform initiation rites and traditional practices rather than simply ban everything. For example, shifting the focus of initiation from harmful cutting to mentorship, skills training, identity reaffirmation. This preserves cultural relevance while eliminating harm. Community-led reform. Top-down legislation often flops. Real change comes when local elders, women's groups, initiation society members engage in reform. Liberia should invest heavily in community dialogues, incentives for alternative rights, and empower women former initiates as reform agents. Regional coalitions. Harmful practices don't respect borders. Liberia could collaborate with neighboring states, Sierra Leone, Guinea, in a shared framework for reform, monitoring, and cultural exchange. This could add moral weight and shared best practices. Data and monitoring. One of the problems is poor data, hidden statistics, fear of naming traditions. Liberia should establish robust monitoring, prevalence of FGM, child marriage rates, health outcomes, prosecution numbers. Transparent numbers help track progress and build accountability. Integration into broader development goals. This bill should not sit in isolation. It links to health, maternal mortality, education, girls staying in school, economic empowerment, women contributing in full, governance, rule of law. Positioning it as part of a national development plan increases its traction. Humor and outreach. Yes, you read that right. Using humor in public awareness campaigns can reduce resistance. A radio sketch, a theater group, satirical songs, maybe a "Your granny survived paradise, but did she survive harmful tradition?" line. Okay, maybe that's edgy, but the point is, outreach must speak to the heart and the culture, not just deliver legalese. Why the outcome matters for Africa and globally. If Liberia passes the bill and makes it meaningful, it becomes a beacon. A former war-torn nation grappling with deep cultural questions, choosing reform over stagnation. That sends a signal to investors, rights bodies, and to African youth who are ambivalent about traditions and modernity. If it fails, the signal is also powerful. Culture as untouchable remains dominant, and the global human rights architecture will see a gap in West Africa. It could slow momentum for reform in other states. And globally, the debate is increasingly framed as, can societies modernize on their own terms, without wholesale westernization, but also without leaving human dignity behind? Liberia's outcome will contribute to that global narrative. The battle lines are drawn. Tradition versus reform. Rural identity versus human rights universalism. Political risk versus moral imperative. But the best outcome will not be one side annihilating the other. Rather, a synthesis where culture evolves. Traditions are refashioned rather than banished. And the most vulnerable girls, women, children are protected. The wider African reflection, when tradition meets transformation. Across Africa, the struggle between cultural preservation and human rights modernization is a recurring theme, like a song whose rhythm never fades, but whose lyrics keep changing with each generation. Liberia is just the latest stage for this timeless performance. From Nigeria's long battles over child marriage to the Gambia's bold move to criminalize FGM, only to witness pushback from conservative clerics, the script is strikingly familiar. A society standing at the crossroads between who we've been and who we aspire to be. Let's take the Gambia, for instance. The country outlawed FGM in 2015 under President Yahya Jammeh's regime. But just this year, 2025, a fierce campaign to repeal the anti-FGM law erupted, with lawmakers arguing that it contradicts Islam and cultural values. BBC Africa 2025. It's an almost mirror reflection of Liberia's current debate. Both societies are wrestling with how to reconcile faith, culture, and human rights, proof that banning a practice doesn't instantly erase centuries of belief. Meanwhile, in Sierra Leone, the home of the Sunday Society that also operates in Liberia, the conversation remains hushed but deeply emotional. There, politicians tiptoe around the subject of FGM as though it were a sleeping lion. They'd rather pet it than wake it. Even President Julius Maada Bio's government has been cautious, preferring community-driven awareness to outright bans. UN Women Africa, 2024. In contrast, Kenya criminalized FGM in 2011 and created an anti-FGM board which works with elders to promote alternative rites of passage. And it worked. In regions like Kajiado and Narok, traditional ceremonies now mark a girl's transition to womanhood without cutting. These FGM-free rites preserve identity while saving lives. Liberia could borrow that page, blending innovation with tradition rather than tearing the cultural book apart. The economic and development angle. Now let's step beyond morality and culture for a moment and put on our economist hat, perhaps with a sprinkle of humor. Imagine Liberia as a startup called Tradition Incorporated, struggling to attract global investors. Its marketing slogan used to be, "We honor our ancestors." But in 2025, investors, aka international partners, want something catchier, like, "We protect our women." President Boakai knows that human rights compliance isn't just ethics, it's economics. According to the World Bank, gender equality and women's empowerment are key drivers of GDP growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Countries that invest in girls' education and reproductive health tend to see higher productivity and lower poverty rates. Liberia's female labor force participation remains below 55%, partly due to early marriage, gender-based violence, and cultural barriers. World Bank Data Portal, 2024. So while some lawmakers see the bill as an attack on culture, Boakai and his technocrats likely see it as an investment in human capital. Every girl who stays in school instead of being forced into early marriage becomes a future professional, taxpayer, and voter. Every woman spared the lifelong complications of FGM becomes a healthier contributor to society. In development terms, this is a return on investment, one that transcends tradition and touches the nation's balance sheet. International watchdogs weigh in. Unsurprisingly, global organizations are watching Liberia's debate closely. The United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, which has worked extensively in Liberia to combat FGM, described Boakai's bill as a necessary step toward fulfilling the nation's international obligations. In its 2025 report, UNFPA reiterated that Liberia remains one of the few West African countries without a national law criminalizing FGM, despite having endorsed both the CEDAW and the Maputo Protocol. UNFPA West and Central Africa Regional Office 2025. The African Union, AU, has also encouraged its members to accelerate the implementation of the Salima Initiative, a continental campaign promoting the idea that every girl should remain Salima, meaning whole, complete, and uncut. If Liberia's legislature passes the bill, it would become the 15th African country to legislate a comprehensive FGM ban, joining Kenya, Uganda, and Burkina Faso. But there's another layer. Liberia's move could boost its standing with international donors, who increasingly link funding to human rights compliance. Whether one calls that progress or pressure depends on perspective. Some see it as global accountability. Others call it cultural imperialism dressed in grant money. The political calculus, Boakai's gamble. From a political lens, Boakai's bill is both a moral statement and a strategic risk. After decades of war and economic hardship, Liberia's democracy is fragile, and its social fabric is woven tightly with traditional authority structures. Rural chiefs and Sunday society leaders wield more influence in some counties than elected officials. By challenging those systems, Boakai risks alienating his own voter base. Think of it as a chess game. He's advancing his queen, women's rights. But traditional power brokers still control half the board. One wrong move and a cultural backlash could checkmate his presidency. Yet Boakai appears willing to take that gamble. In political terms, he's betting that urban youth, civil society advocates, and international partners will rally behind his vision of a modern Liberia. And if the bill passes, he'll have political capital to frame himself as a reformer, a statesman who dared to confront taboo, the role of the church and traditional leaders. One of the most overlooked forces in this debate is religion. Liberia is a predominantly Christian country, but traditional secret societies, especially the Sunday and Poro, still shape spiritual and moral life in rural regions. Many pastors have quietly backed the president's move, citing Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But traditional leaders interpret it differently. As one elder told Front Page Africa, the Sandy made our mothers who they are. To ban it is to erase our mother's honor. FrontPageAfricaOnline.com, 2025. This emotional argument highlights how the bill touches not only human rights law but also the philosophy of identity. What defines womanhood? Is it cultural initiation or the freedom to choose one's body? Here's where Liberia can take lessons from Tanzania, which faced similar tensions when banning child marriage in 2016. The government engaged religious councils and traditional elders, explaining that the ban was not an attack, but a protection. That narrative shift, we are saving, not shaming our culture, helped neutralize resistance. Liberia may need a similar communication strategy to avoid open cultural warfare. Youth and social media dynamics. While lawmakers argue in the corridors of power, the real debate is raging online. Liberian youth on TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook have turned the topic into a digital showdown of hashtags. Hashtag protect our girls versus hashtag respect our culture. Some posts show university students staging symbolic uncut marches, carrying placards that read, "Culture should heal, not harm." Others respond with memes mocking the president's Western agenda. A particularly viral post depicted Boakai dressed as a colonial officer holding scissors over a traditional drum. The caption? When heritage meets Harvard. Humor aside, the generational divide is clear. Younger Liberians, especially in Monrovia, tend to favor the ban. They see it as liberation from outdated systems that keep women invisible and obedient. Older generations, especially in rural areas, view it as arrogance, a city-born rebellion against the wisdom of ancestors. This digital activism could prove decisive. If the youth sustain their online campaign, they might reshape the political cost of supporting the bill, turning what looks like a risk today into an electoral asset tomorrow. The road ahead, between education and enforcement. As Liberia's legislative committees begin their review, a clear roadmap is emerging. The success of this reform won't depend solely on law enforcement, but on cultural education. History shows that laws without learning simply breed resistance. UNFPA has already pledged technical support for national awareness campaigns, working with the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection to launch programs targeting the 15 counties most affected by FGM. The strategy includes community dialogues, survivor stories, and alternative right ceremonies. Because, as one campaigner put it, you can't ban what people don't understand. You must replace it with something better. The 6-month transitional period in Boakai's proposal could therefore be the bill's saving grace. If the government uses that window effectively to engage chiefs, churches, schools, and media, the law could transform from a threat to an opportunity. Regional implications, from Monrovia to Addis Ababa. Liberia's decision could echo beyond its borders. The African Union's Agenda 2063, the continent's long-term vision, calls for an Africa free of harmful practices. Boakai's bill aligns neatly with that ambition, and if passed, it might earn Liberia applause at the next AU summit in Addis Ababa. But here's the twist. In Africa's Club of Presidents, cultural reforms often divide opinion. Some leaders fear that confronting traditional authorities risks political stability. Others see it as moral leadership. If Boakai pulls this off, he could find himself on international panels alongside the likes of Kenya's reformers and Ethiopia's gender equality champions. The irony? Liberia, the oldest republic in Africa, may finally be catching up to younger democracies when it comes to modern human rights legislation. And so the debate continues. Liberia now stands at an inflection point. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers deliberate. In the villages, elders resist. Online, youth agitate. President Boakai's bill has done what few policies manage. It has forced a nation to look itself in the mirror and ask, what kind of Liberia do we want to become? A nation defined by inherited customs, or one redefined by conscious choices? As the committees prepare their report and citizens brace for the next phase of the debate, one thing is certain. This conversation has only just begun. Tradition on trial. The cultural identity dilemma. Liberia's current debate over harmful cultural practices isn't just about lawmaking. It's about who gets to define identity in a modern African state. It is, at its core, a tug-of-war between ancestral legitimacy and constitutional modernity. In the remote hinterlands of Lofa, Bong, and Gbarpolu, where the Sande and Poro societies operate as cultural guardians, the notion of an outsider, even if that outsider is the president, telling them what aspects of their rituals are acceptable, feels like a spiritual trespass. For many traditionalists, these societies are not mere clubs, but sacred institutions passed down through generations. Their secrets are guarded as fiercely as national borders. A cultural elder in Zorzor district told Front Page Africa that, what outsiders call harmful is the wisdom of our mothers. She continued, when a girl goes through initiation, she learns respect, endurance, womanhood. The cutting is only one part of the ceremony. It is not the essence. Such perspectives reveal a critical nuance that often gets lost in the international narrative. The symbolic and social capital of these rituals runs deeper than outsiders understand. For rural Liberians, the initiation school is not just a rite. It's a cultural passport into adulthood, family honor, and community acceptance. So when President Boakai frames his reform as a moral and legal obligation, traditionalists hear something different, an existential threat to their communal soul. The rights perspective, modern law versus traditional law. But here lies the paradox. The same Liberia that honors ancestral authority is also a signatory to a web of international treaties, from CEDAW to the Maputo Protocol, all demanding the protection of women's bodily autonomy. And therein lies the national schizophrenia. Two legal systems coexisting uneasily, customary law and statutory law. One rooted in the forest shrine, the other in Monrovia's marble buildings. Human rights lawyer Esther Kroma explained it succinctly in an interview with the Africa Report. Liberia is not fighting between law and lawlessness. We are fighting between two laws that both believe they are sacred, one written on paper, the other written in the heart of tradition. Her words cut through the noise. The president's bill, she argues, doesn't just challenge a practice. It challenges the power structure that keeps traditional leaders politically relevant. Many rural chiefs act as arbiters of justice, marriage, inheritance, and land. Weakening their authority could mean reshaping the country's entire socio-political architecture, a domino effect that few politicians are brave enough to trigger. The gender politics within the debate. Interestingly, this cultural showdown has exposed gender dynamics not only between men and women, but among women themselves. Female lawmakers and rights activists, many of whom were once members of Sanda societies, are facing intense backlash from other women who accuse them of betraying the sisterhood. During one recent radio debate on ELBC, a caller from Bomi County accused a female MP of selling the souls of Liberian women to please the white man. Another caller countered, "Liberian men have used culture to control women for too long. Let's call it what it is. Power in disguise." This kind of internal division is not unique to Liberia. In Nigeria, the fight over early marriage laws in the north saw women activists accused of Western contamination. In Sudan, the 2020 repeal of FGM laws led to similar intragender rifts, as some rural women defended the practice as purity and preparation for marriage. In Liberia's case, the divide mirrors a generational shift. Older women, especially in the rural heartlands, hold the line for tradition. Younger women, mostly urban and educated, see reform as liberation. The two groups speak the same language but live in different centuries. The role of media and messaging. Let's be honest. In Africa, policy success often depends not on the strength of the law, but on how well the message is sold. President Boakai's communication strategy could make or break this reform. So far, his messaging has leaned heavily on moral reasoning and international commitments. But rural Liberians don't speak the language of UN conventions. They respond to stories, symbols, and songs. What Liberia needs is a cultural translation strategy, turning human rights advocacy into something culturally digestible. Imagine a national campaign featuring respected elders saying, "We can still be proud of our heritage without harming our daughters." Imagine folk songs that teach, through humor and parable, that a tree can grow strong even if we prune its thorns. This is where artists, radio hosts, and local influencers come in. In Sierra Leone, the fight against FGM made progress only after musicians and radio comedians turned the message into entertainment. In Kenya, activists partnered with local theater groups to dramatize alternative rights. Liberia could follow suit. A catchy slogan might just save a generation, because sometimes a jingle reaches hearts faster than a legal document. Humor in the midst of heated debates. Let's lighten the tension, because this debate has produced moments that could fit right into an African political sitcom. During a legislative hearing, one MP reportedly stood up and said, "Mr. Speaker, before we talk about banning anything, we must ask our wives if they agree. After all, they are the ones we're protecting." Cue laughter. Another legislator responded, "Yes, honorable member, but some of those wives were cut before we married them. We might be arguing too late." It's absurd, yes, but also telling. Humor has become a coping mechanism for a society wrestling with its conscience. Even satire shows like the Monrovia Hour have started poking fun at politicians flip-flopping between protecting culture and protecting women. But in that irony lies a profound truth. Liberia is laughing its way through a cultural reckoning. The diaspora voice. The Liberian diaspora, particularly in the United States and Europe, has joined the debate with renewed vigor. Many exiled Liberians see the president's move as long overdue, a moral realignment with global progress. Prominent voices like Nyuma Boakai, the Nobel Peace Laureate who helped end Liberia's civil war, have argued that FGM is a continuation of violence in peacetime. In a recent speech at Columbia University, she noted, "We cannot claim peace when women's bodies remain battlegrounds of tradition." Diaspora organizations, including the Liberian Women's Association of Europe, LWAE, and the Liberian Human Rights Network, LHRN, are lobbying their home legislators to pass the bill. They've even offered to fund public education campaigns through remittance-backed initiatives. However, critics in Liberia accuse these groups of cultural elitism, saying those living abroad, disconnected from local customs, should not dictate how the homeland evolves. One lawmaker bluntly said, "You can't legislate for people you left behind at John F. Kennedy Airport." That jab captures the emotional complexity of diaspora advocacy, admired for its resources, resented for its perceived detachment, a crossroads for leadership. At this point, President Boakai's leadership faces a test of both courage and diplomacy. His predecessors avoided the subject entirely, treating FGM and related issues as political landmines. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia's first female president, signed an executive order banning FGM for minors in 2018, but she stopped short of enacting a full criminal law, calling it a conversation for another time. Boakai has decided that the time is now, even if it costs him political peace. But can he sustain the momentum? Will his party stand united? Will opposition members turn this into a populist wedge issue before the next election? The answers depend on how quickly he can reframe the narrative, not as culture versus progress, but as culture evolving with dignity. The ripple effect across West Africa. If Liberia succeeds, it could trigger a domino effect across the region. Sierra Leone's civil society groups have already hinted at using Boakai's initiative as a blueprint. In Guinea, activists have hailed Liberia's move as a breath of courage in a region gasping for reform. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, too, has taken note. In a recent communiqué, the ECOWAS Commission on Gender and Human Rights urged member states to harmonize laws that prohibit harmful traditional practices. A Liberian victory could therefore become a regional benchmark, nudging others towards similar legislative frameworks. But, and here's the catch, failure could have the opposite effect. If the bill collapses under cultural pressure, it would embolden conservative blocs elsewhere to declare, "See? Even Liberia couldn't defy tradition." The stakes, therefore, are both national and continental, between faith, fear, and the future. As Liberia inches toward the committee report deadline, the atmosphere remains charged. Religious leaders are cautiously weighing in, traditional councils are mobilizing, and civil society activists are holding town hall meetings under the banner, "Culture must heal, not harm." The tension between faith and fear is palpable. On one hand, there's fear of losing cultural identity. On the other, faith that change, however painful, can lead to renewal. In that fragile balance lies the story of a nation still healing from war, still redefining democracy, and still deciding what Liberian culture means in the 21st century. The global lens. How Liberia's debate reflects Africa's growing pains. Liberia's cultural crossroads is not occurring in isolation. It mirrors the struggle many African nations face in reconciling heritage with humanity, faith with freedom, and tradition with transformation. From Sudan's reversal of women's rights reforms to Nigeria's battles over child marriage laws, and Ethiopia's complex dance between religious conservatism and women's empowerment, Africa is wrestling with the question, how do you modernize without losing your soul? And let's be honest, this is not a simple question of right versus wrong. It's a test of leadership, courage, and cultural intelligence. In many ways, Liberia is acting as a mirror for the continent, reflecting the anxiety of societies trying to grow up without abandoning their ancestral roots. President Boakai's bill may have ignited controversy, but it has also reawakened Africa's conscience. It has forced uncomfortable questions into the open about the cost of silence, the meaning of progress, and the power of culture to either heal or harm. A deeper ethical reflection. One of Africa's greatest assets is its cultural richness, its songs, its rituals, its languages, its sense of belonging. But when culture becomes a shield for violence, it loses its moral authority. True culture uplifts. It does not mutilate. It teaches compassion, not compliance. It celebrates life, not the endurance of pain. The late Ghanaian diplomat Kofi Annan once said, "Culture is the essence of a people, but it must be the servant of human dignity, not its master." Liberia's debate is therefore not about destroying culture, but redeeming it. pulling out the weeds of cruelty while preserving the flowers of identity. In that sense, banning harmful practices is not an act of rebellion against tradition, it is an act of love for the culture's future, because cultures that do not evolve eventually dissolve. Lessons for African policymakers. Liberia's struggle offers valuable lessons to other African leaders and policymakers facing similar challenges. 1. Legislation must walk with education. Passing laws is easy, changing minds is hard. Boakai's 6-month transitional period, if used wisely, could be a model for blending dialogue with enforcement. Grassroots education, storytelling, and community theater can achieve what court orders cannot. Second, engage traditional leaders, don't alienate them. Chiefs and elders are not obstacles. They are cultural gatekeepers. Involving them in reform legitimizes the message. As Kenya and Tanzania have shown, alternative rites of passage succeed only when elders feel respected, not replaced. Third, empower local women as reform champions. Real change begins when women within the system, former initiates, market leaders, female chiefs, speak for reform. Outsiders can inspire, but insiders transform. Fourth, use culture as a vehicle for advocacy. African storytelling, humor, and music remain unmatched tools for social transformation. A law that dances to the rhythm of culture will travel farther than one written in legal jargon. Fifth, frame reform as national pride, not foreign pressure. The greatest resistance to human rights reforms in Africa often stems from the belief that they are Western imports. Framing them as African moral evolution, a natural continuation of Ubuntu, dignity, and respect, can silence that narrative. Sixth, make it economic, not just ethical. Show how ending harmful practices boosts productivity, health, and education. When reform benefits the household, it becomes a family discussion, not a feminist manifesto. The bigger picture. Africa's cultural renaissance. If Liberia succeeds in enacting and implementing this law, it could mark the beginning of a new African renaissance, one that blends ancestral wisdom with modern consciousness. It could help redefine African culture as something dynamic, compassionate, and forward-looking, rather than static and defensive. Across the continent, a new generation is already rewriting what it means to be African. They are proud of their roots, but also unafraid to challenge what no longer serves them. Whether it's young Kenyan girls rejecting FGM, Nigerian activists pushing against domestic violence, or South African students demanding decolonized yet inclusive education, Africa's youth are crafting a new moral order where tradition and progress coexist. In that sense, President Boakai's Liberia has stepped into the arena of history, not as a nation erasing its culture, but as one editing it for survival. A word of advice to African leaders. Dear African leaders, the world is changing, and so must your leadership philosophy. Tradition is not an excuse for stagnation. Modernization is not an attack on culture. The art of great leadership is to balance both, to protect the dignity of your people while freeing them from invisible chains. Do not fear reform because it angers a few elders. Fear stagnation because it will disappoint future generations. As the African proverb wisely says, the river that forgets its source will dry up, but the river that refuses to flow will become a swamp. Leadership, therefore, is about steering that river, honoring its source while guiding it toward a better shore. Key takeaways and final reflection. Liberia's Harmful Cultural Practices Bill is not merely legislation, it is a moral mirror reflecting Africa's identity crisis. The debate highlights the clash between cultural preservation and human rights, yet it also presents a rare opportunity for constructive evolution. Africa's progress will depend on how well its leaders can blend tradition with transformation, ensuring that culture remains a force for unity, not division. The path forward demands courageous leadership, inclusive dialogue, and cultural empathy. Laws must be paired with education, modernity must respect heritage, and human rights must speak the language of the people. As Liberia's legislature prepares to decide the fate of President Boakai's proposal, the continent watches, not merely as spectators but as stakeholders in Africa's unfolding cultural journey, because ultimately the question facing Liberia today is the same one facing Africa tomorrow. Can we protect our traditions without harming our people? If the answer is yes, and it must be, then this generation of African leaders will not only make history, but humanize it. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa's truth meets the world's attention. The debate in Liberia is more than political. It's philosophical. It challenges every African leader and citizen to decide, what kind of Africa do we want? One ruled by the past or one guided by conscience? Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the stories shaping our continent. Until next time, remember, real change begins when bold voices rise.